Hey friends, it's Mike. It's Sunday, June 26, 2022, and with this video I'm going to cover some of the popular, emerging, and one-off Paul is Dead memes that I get asked about frequently. So there are going to be 4 of those that I will discuss with this video. The first one is going to look at whether John Halliday is biological Paul McCartney, whether Colin Unwin was John, and whether Mark Stacer was John Lennon. And then I'll move to whether all of the Beatles died in 1966, going to a watery death. It is referred to as being Titanic. And then I'll talk about the, quote, twin theory, which has multiple scenarios or multiple flavors. One states that biological Paul had a twin brother who replaced him. The second scenario is that Billy is biological Paul's twin. And the third scenario states that Billy himself has a twin which is not linked to Bio Paul. And the last premise, I will talk to this relatively new meme which states that Paul McCartney and the Beatles never existed. They were characters played by various actors and performers. And again, these are questions that I get asked about a lot, whether through email and the comment section, and so I thought it would be good to cover these versus typing out responses in the comment section one-on-one. So let's talk a little bit about conspiracies and the different approaches and the different buckets that, quote, research falls into. The first bucket is speculation. And there's a lot of speculation in conspiracy research in general. And unfortunately, a lot of people take speculation and they call it theory. And they are very, very different. So to speculate is to form a theory or conjecture about a subject without firm evidence. If you speculate about something, you make guesses about its nature or identity or about what might happen or happened. And then we have a hypothesis, which is an assumption made before any research has been done. It is formed so that it can be tested to see if it might be true. And then we have a theory, which is a principle formed to explain the things already shown in data. Because of the rigors of experiment and control, it is much more likely that a theory will be true versus a hypothesis. Now, having been in the conspiracy research game for quite a while, it's safe to say that there's going to be a certain level of speculation and hypothesis before you can get to a theory, because you have to speculate about something before you start to formulate your hypothesis. And then you start the testing process, and that will hopefully get you to a solid theory. And this is where I strive to take my work, to formulate a theory based upon evidence. And we have to be aware that in conspiracy research, conspiracies in general, that when we talk about evidence, we're talking about circumstantial evidence. Because if there were direct evidence, then there wouldn't be much of a conspiracy, right? But where I am speculating, I will always try to call that out. And where I have a hypothesis, I will also try to call that out as well. As an example, when I did the 2-hour presentation on how many John Lennons were there, I stated that this was a hypothesis. Okay, but unfortunately, what we find in the land of the truther community and conspiracy research is that everything is called a theory, and not everything is a theory. A lot of it is speculation, a lot of it is hypothesis, and a very small segment of it, in my opinion, actually qualifies as a theory. Okay, so with that, let's move to the next slide. Okay, so with slide number 3, I want to talk a bit about my focus and how it pertains to my research. Because many times I'm asked, Mike, why don't you look at this? And why don't you look at that? And when I do the research, I have to prioritize what I believe will bring more value add to a greater understanding of what's going on in the world. So in other words, how am I going to better understand the big picture? Because as we speak, the controllers are well underway in their attempts to fundamentally change the world, our societies, our cultures. We can see this taking place right before our very eyes. And quite frankly, many times people are asking me to look at things that I just see as a wheel spinning exercise, getting lost in the weeds, or worse, it's entertainment for the person that is asking. And I don't do this for entertainment. I don't do conspiratainment. Now, don't get me wrong, I tried to bring in some entertaining aspects into my presentation in order to keep people's focus, to keep them interested in what I'm presenting, but I'm not doing this for entertainment value. So, what I'm focused on is the agenda and desired end state of the controllers, which is a one world government and one world religion. I'm very intrigued by the philosophy and the ideology of the pyramid of power, which would be Luciferianism, Satanism, Crowleyism, occultism, and transhumanism. And all of these are linked. I'm also very interested in the methods the controllers use to achieve their goals. And this is done through psychological operations and social engineering, which comes to the masses primarily through the media and entertainment. I'm also very intrigued by the music and entertainment industry's impact on the population. And many of you have heard me refer to the music and entertainment industry as a big tool in the controller's toolbox. And what I mean by that is their ability to condition the masses, creating cult mentalities and idol worship via illusion, magic, rituals, etc. So if somebody's going to ask me, am I going to do a presentation and look at how many George Harrisons there were, or how many Ringo Starrs there were, I'm not going to do that. Because what's far more important is this: understanding how the controllers go about making change. And change that is not favorable to humanity. And last but not least, of course, I'm very interested in how the Beatles as a manufactured entity, a psychological operation created by Tavistock, were and still are a major force in driving massive societal and cultural change across the world. And the Beatles are at the forefront of bringing in Crowley's Aeon of Horus, the Age of Aquarius, and the New Age. Pick your label. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Okay, so with this slide number 4, I want to talk about my positions at a glance. And I felt this was important because there are people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, misconstrue or take out of context my research or things that I have said either during an interview or a presentation. So let me just go through this quick list. The Beatles were a manufactured band, a product of Tavistock, and were never organic. It's possible all 4 Beatles were in mind control programs from an early age, especially John and Paul. The Beatles, as an entity, are immersed in the occult and occult symbolism. All 4 Beatles existed, but were supplemented with doubles and lookalikes since inception. Photos, images, and video have been doctored from the very beginning. The Beatles were a major and highly successful social engineering initiative. The Beatles did not write all their own music. The Beatles did not play on all their recorded tracks, especially between the period of 1962 through 1966, where studio musicians were used, and I refer to this as the Wrecking Crew model. Now, things changed up a bit between 1967 and 1970, where the Beatles were writing more of their own material and playing on more of the recorded tracks, but outside songwriters and studio musicians were still being utilized on their recordings. Biological Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced. Billy Shears / Shepherd / Campbell is the primary replacement playing the McCartney character, meaning Billy has the long-term contract. With others, including doubles and lookalikes, paging in and out, playing the part of McCartney along the timeline. And last, as I mentioned in the previous chart, the Beatles have a major role in bringing about the New Age. And with that, let's talk a little bit about what I do not focus on, and then we will move to the Halliday Biopol comparison. Okay, so with slide number 5, let me talk a little bit about what I do not focus on. I obviously do not focus on embracing the Cinderella story, which is the rags to riches fictional account of how the Beatles came to be. We all know the story. 4 working-class Liverpool lads connect with a record store owner, Brian Epstein, who was then able to get them signed to EMI under the tutelage of George Martin, and then unprecedented fame and fortune. That story is fictional. I don't spend any time on repetitive image comparisons of Paul McCartney. And we see this on many of these Paul is Dead Facebook pages where people sit there all day and upload these images. My take on it is, once you know JPM was replaced, you know it's time to move on. I don't spend any time on Biopol's out-of-wedlock children. And it's not because I don't sympathize with these folks. It's because their claims will never be validated with either an admission or through DNA. And sometimes someone will leave a comment and say, well, why don't they get a sample of biological Paul McCartney's DNA and then have it analyzed? And my response is, well, where exactly do you think they're going to get a sample of biological Paul's DNA? If there is a sample, and I'm sure there is, it's locked up somewhere in some deep state vault. And what a lot of folks still cannot get their heads wrapped around, even in the Paul is Dead community, is that the Beatles were a massive psychological operation that came down from the Committee of 300 to Tavistock. They just can't get their heads wrapped around this. And they're not going to get Mike McCartney's DNA either, if Mike McCartney is even biological Paul's biological brother. And an example of how the deep state will eventually shut these types of cases down is the Erica Hubers paternity case, which ran from 1982 through 2007. Erica Hubers was in a relationship with biological Paul McCartney, and she had a child, Bettina. So Bettina is the biological daughter of biological Paul McCartney. And Billy was making child support payments because of existing child support agreements that were in place. But when Bettina turned 18, he stopped making the payments. When he stopped making the payments, Erica Hubers decided to take him to court to extend the child support beyond the age of 18. And this went on for a long time. Eventually, Billy was instructed by the court to submit DNA. And so he did. And when the DNA came back, it didn't match. And because it didn't match, what decision is the court going to come to? Well, Billy, as, quote, Paul McCartney, is not the biological father. And so she accused Billy of sending an imposter to go get the DNA sample, to go get the blood work done. And in memoirs, Billy explains, this got very, very uncomfortable. It was a very close call. But what eventually happened? The German courts just shut it down. I'm amazed that it ran as long as it did. I'm guessing the tactic was that Erica Hubers would eventually just run out of gas and she would stop pursuing. But she was like a bulldog and she didn't stop pursuing. So at which point the deep state made a phone call and said, it's over. Shut it down. That's how it works. That's how the real world works. I also don't spend any time trying to identify the names of the doubles and lookalikes. I view this as a wheel-spinning exercise due to secrecy agreements. So all of these doubles and lookalikes had to sign agreements. They cannot open their mouths. Aside from the fact that many of them are probably not even alive anymore. I don't spend any time on half-baked, quote, research by the growing number of people jumping into the game for clicks. So I call this dopamine hits. These folks wanting their 15 minutes of fame, etc. I don't spend any time on that stuff. And when folks send me these links, it takes me about 30 seconds of viewing to figure out where this is going, and I just shut it down. And last but not least, I don't spend any time on the haters and the low functioning. My work and my channel is geared toward people who want to discover, explore, and critically think. I have no time and no room in my life for this segment of the population, whether they be outside or within the Paul is Dead community. Okay, so with that, let's move to John Halliday. Okay, so let's talk a bit about John Halliday. I've been asked this question many, many times. Is Halliday biological Paul McCartney? And each time I've been asked, I've responded with no, he is not biological Paul, and it's a ruse. And I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video and you're into Paul is Dead research, you are very familiar with the video of Halliday, which went viral within the Paul is Dead community, where he steps out of Paul's childhood home. I think he has a beer in his hand, and he is either the caretaker or a tour guide, and he's talking to some folks outside. And because he has a resemblance to Paul McCartney, this lit a lot of people up, especially within the Paul is Dead community, to start believing that Paul did not die. He is alive and well, and he is now a caretaker at his childhood home. And the whole premise is ridiculous. So when I first saw the video, I thought to myself, well, somebody's having some fun here. Okay? Now, one of the things that I point to and have been for a long time with regard to Halliday is to look at the ears. So on the left, here's a profile of John Halliday, and on the right, a profile of biological Paul McCartney. The ears are very different. Halliday's ears, first of all, sit lower on his face, and they are longer than Paul's. But most importantly, look at the inner ear. Look at how it's constructed. Look at John's ear, and then look at Paul's ear. It's completely different. It's a completely different ear. And when I pointed this out in a correspondence with somebody, I think they sent me an email, and I talked about how the ears were different. They responded by saying, well, perhaps one of them is wearing fake ears. So here we have a situation where the person is rationalizing because they want to believe, they so desperately want to believe that biological Paul McCartney did not die and that he is still alive and he is now the caretaker or the tour guide at his childhood home. So if you just take a moment and think about that, the whole premise is ridiculous. So right out of the chute, completely different ears, and they are not fake ears. Again, look at the inner ear. Look at how it's constructed. Very, very different. Okay, let's move to the next slide. On the left, I have an image of Bio Paul. You've seen this many times in my presentations. And then we have 3 images of John Halliday. So if we just look at the image of Bio Paul and then look at the image right here, the second image, these are 2 different people. Look at the ears. I talked about how Halliday's ears sit lower on his face. We don't have this here with Paul. Also, Halliday is a ginger. He has reddish blonde hair and a fair complexion. A very different complexion and very different hair than biological Paul McCartney. Here's another image of Halliday. He's a little older here. but you can see he has a rather large head, a round, large head. And what's throwing people is the puppy dog look of the eyes. Because they see this, oh, it's got to be Paul McCartney. But it's not Paul McCartney. And again, look at his ears. Very, very different ears. And here's the last image here on the right. Again, we have somebody who has a fair complexion. He's a ginger. And look at his ears. See how low they sit? It's not Bio Paul. Now, some have asked me, well, could he have been a double? I don't know. Anything is possible. I doubt it, but anything is possible. But what I'm addressing here is whether he is biological Paul McCartney, and I've concluded that he is not. So after my visual inspection and looking at biological Paul and John Halliday and concluding that they are not the same person, I decided let's put it through the Pictreve and ToolPy AI facial comparison tools. And my favorite, which I think is more accurate than Pictreve, is ToolPy, by the way. But I did both. So the Pictreve analysis is here on the left. And in each case, with each one of the Halliday images, comparing to the baseline image of Paul McCartney, it comes up with a different person. They are not the same person. And then I ran the exact same images through ToolPy. And ToolPy came back and said, face similarity ratio 60%, which is not high, and determined they are not the same person. Then when I ran the second image, the face similarity ratio was 55%, still in the same ballpark, not the same person. And then I ran the last image, the older image of Halliday. Face similarity ratio 54%, not the same person. Okay, so visual inspection and then going through these AI tools, Halliday is not biological Paul. And of course, people are going to disagree with me, and that's okay. Like I said, I don't do this to convince you. I'm just presenting my findings, my research, my ideas. So I've been asked about this, so I'm responding. So now let's move to the Colin Unwin and John Lennon comparison. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a couple of slides where I compare Colin Unwin to John Lennon. Of course, the meme that's out there is that Unwin is the original John Lennon. And I'll cut to the chase. I found that they have different earlobes, different eyes, a different nose, and a different mouth/smile. So let's just take it step by step. If we take a look at the ears, John had very unique earlobes. They protruded out, but not only did they protrude out, they were also very much attached. There was no detachment to the earlobe. The bottom of the lobe was attached to the side of his head. And when I look at Colin Unwin, and we'll use this image here because obviously it's the clearest that I have available. It was very difficult, by the way, to find clear images of Colin Unwin. Most of them look like this, the third and fourth picture. And I included the third and fourth because of the eyes and the smile. But let's focus on image number 2. So if we look at Colin's earlobes, even though they protrude out a bit, they are not attached like John's are attached. There's a bit of a detachment here. Okay, so they do not have the same ears. If I look at the eyes, John had very unique eyes in the sense that they were these elongated ovals. He had almost a sleepy look to them. We could see it here in the image all the way on the left. We could see it here on the image all the way to the right. And quite honestly, I do not see that with Colin Unwin. I see different eyes. Here in image number 3, the eyes don't look anything like John Lennon. As well as in image number 4. Now, somebody will argue, well, that's because he's smiling, and so his eyes are going to be affected by the smile. I don't buy it. Okay, I just don't see the same eyes, whether it's picture 4, picture 3, or picture 2. And then if we look at the nose, John had this very elongated nose where the base of the nose, where the nostrils are, flared out. And you can see it's wide, right? We have this wide flare right here at the base of the nose. And we can also see it here from more of a profile view where it's, it's longer at the base of the nose, right where the nostrils are. And I don't see that nose on Colin Unwin. Now, I know there are going to be people that will argue, well, that's because he's older here, and so the nose has changed a bit. Well, it would have changed a lot, in my opinion, because I don't see the same nose at all. It's very difficult to see here in this picture, as well as in this one. But what I do see in each one of the pictures is there's kind of a roundness at the tip of the nose. So where my arrow is, see the tip of Colin's nose here in picture number 2? It's a little wider, rounder. I see the same thing here, even though it's a tough image, as well as right here. John's nose was a bit pointy. And then if we take a look at the smile, John had this half moon with the bottom lip, top lip straight across. And even though he's not really smiling here, I just see a different mouth. The same thing here. Here we have Unwin smiling, and I don't see the same smile. And I don't see it here either in picture number 4. Okay, so this is visual inspection. Just taking a look at facial features. And I don't see the same person. To me, they are 2 different people. So let's move to slide number 10. And this is the Pictreve analysis. This is the AI-based facial comparison tool that's on the internet. And the base image is this one here of Colin, the clear image. And I put up various images of Lennon during the early period, except the last image here, which is from Double Fantasy. And with each comparison, Pictreve came back and said they are not the same person in all 6 compares. So again, my visual inspection, looking at facial features, I said, not the same person. Then I ran it through the Pictreve tool, and Pictreve came back and said, not the same person. So let's take a look at what ToolPy came back with. So again, here's our base image. And I took the same exact images from the Pictreve analysis and placed them into ToolPy. So this image of John from Hamburg, ToolPy came back and said the face similarity ratio is 33%, which is very low, and that they are not the same person. And then I took the base image of Colin Unwin and laid it up against this very early headshot of John Lennon. And ToolPy came back and said that the face similarity ratio was 38%. Again, that's very low, and that they are not the same person. And then I compared it to the photo on the upper right. Face similarity ratio, 43%, not the same person. And then I took the base image and compared it to the lower left image of, quote, Lennon. And ToolPy came back and said that the face similarity ratio was 21%, and obviously not the same person. And then I have this image of Lennon from the early days in Hamburg. He must have been around 19 or 20 here. And when I compared this image to Colin, ToolPy kicked back a face similarity ratio of 37%, and obviously not the same person. And then I took the base image and laid it up against this version of Lennon from the double fantasy period. Face similarity ratio 42%, and they are not the same person. And the reason why I have the arrow here is because I'm going to go back to these two images in an upcoming slide. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So the net of it is, based upon my visual observation, based upon using Pictreve and ToolPy, and again, I think ToolPy is a better tool than Pictreve as far as facial comparison goes. But in either case, both tools came back and said that Colin Unwin is not John Lennon. So, Halliday and Unwin, an eminence front. It's a put on. So these two guys here, in my opinion, are having a lot of fun. But these two guys, Unwin and Halliday, are not these two guys. They are not John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Okay? All right, let's move to the Mark Stacer John Lennon comparison. Now, this one got legs a number of years ago. I believe it was a research document that was posted by Miles Mathis. And Stacer was the guy that was in the movie Let Him Be, which was a fictional account, a fantasy type of documentary where John Lennon was still alive. And there are still people who are adamant and claiming that Stacer is John Lennon. But again, go to the ears. And so here's a still from the movie, Let Him Be. And we can see that Mark has very, very different ears than John Lennon. In fact, Mark's ears, he has detached earlobes. And as I mentioned, Lennon has attached. And we can see it very well here in the third image. So if we take a look at Mark's ear, let's take a look at the image on the far right. Look at the ear, look at how the ear is constructed, the inner ear. And let's take a look at John. Attached earlobes, detached. And look at the inner ear. It's very, very different. In fact, the crease in Mark's ear, if we look at the far right photo, goes all the way around his ear. We can also see it here in the photo or the image on the left. Different ears. So Mark Stacer is not John Lennon either. Okay, so that concludes the John Halliday, Colin Unwin, Mark Stacer segment of the presentation. And what I'm going to do now is move to the next topic, whether the Beatles all died in 1966 and whether they were Titanic. Stay with me. Okay, so did all of the Beatles die in 1966? This is a premise which states that they were victims of a watery death, which is referred to in the Paul is Dead circles as being Titanic. And there is one researcher who I interviewed a number of years ago who is a proponent of this plot. And when I asked them what proof they had to validate their conclusions, or at least their hypothesis, they really didn't come up with much other than taking a look at images and doing image comparisons, which by itself is not conclusive by any stretch, but I digress. So the premise goes this way. After their last performance at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, all four Beatles died in a helicopter crash between San Francisco and LA on August 29th, 1966. And after that, four doubles and lookalikes emerged with Sgt. Pepper, 1967, and they often point to the songs Yellow Submarine and Octopus's Garden for obvious reasons because they have to do with water. And I will leave a link down below in the description box to the website that talks about this, and here's the link right here. I will admit it's a very entertaining story. Do I believe it? No, not at all. But it is a very entertaining read. So you can go take a look for yourself. The link is down below. Okay, so let's talk about the song clues. And Yellow Submarine and Octopus's Garden are used as clues to this particular premise for obvious reasons. They have connections to water. But Yellow Submarine, when we talk about a submarine, something is submerged, which also means it is subterranean or below ground. And we know the lyrics in the song. So we sailed up to the sun till we found the sea of green, sky of blue and sea of green. The sea is blue. Grass is green. The sea of green lyric is referring to grass. So if Yellow Submarine is a Paul is Dead song, which it is likely referring to burial on land. For those who are interested in listening to a theory as to where Paul McCartney might be interred, I recommend watching Steve Farber's series of presentations on the Standing Stone. And the link is in the description box below. And so that takes us to the song Octopus's Garden. And for those that subscribe to the theory of the helicopter crash and then the Beatles going down to a watery death, they will point to this song as a possible clue. The thing is, the octopus is Illuminati symbolism referencing their all-encompassing and far-reaching control. It has nothing to do with death or burial at sea. And as I've mentioned previously, and as many of you know, the Beatles, as a massive psychological operation to social engineer, played a major role in the Illuminati's ability to achieve that far-reaching control by conditioning the masses, by getting the masses to relinquish traditional values and organized religion, specifically Christianity. The Illuminati really have it out for Christianity. And so if we look at the image on the right, we have Illuminati puppet extraordinaire, Lady Gaga, and she's all dressed up in an octopus outfit. So the song Octopus's Garden, I don't think it has anything to do with death or burial at sea. It's a song that's done in a playful fashion, which is putting the message out that the Illuminati, through the octopus symbolism, to Beatle fans and Beatle worshippers, unknowingly of course, that the Illuminati, the all-seeing eye, sees everything, has total control. So to show you that this is not a one-off, let me take you to two more charts where I found some octopus symbolism. So to the far left, we have this intelligence logo. I think it's from the NSA. And we have the octopus with its tentacles around Earth. And of course, in James Bond, we have the movie Octopussy. And the organization, the criminal organization that Bond is constantly battling with, Spectre. And this is their logo here, with the octopus. And then we have Miley Cyrus, another Illuminati puppet, displaying an octopus toy. And all the way to the right, Marvel Comics, their Marvel Hydra logo is that of an octopus. So let's move to the next slide. And here we have an image of Katy Perry at an American Idol event, and she's dressed up in an octopus costume. Z La La, I'm not really sure who this is. I understand she's a celebrity and singer. She's at the American Music Awards, and she is also dressed in an octopus outfit. And to the far right, we have actress Lucy Punch, also dressed in octopus garb. Okay, so the octopus, again, is Illuminati symbolism, and it is pointing to and reinforcing the concept of their control over the world. So now what I'm going to do is to take you through some slides that I pulled from my presentation, How Many John Lennons Were There? And the reason why I'm going to represent these slides is because I believe it proves that John Lennon did not pass away in 1966. And remember, the premise of this Titanic plot is that all four Beatles disappeared in 66. And doubles and lookalikes emerged with Sgt. Pepper in 1967. And with that, let's move to slide 18. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a number of charts that I presented in my presentation, How Many John Lennons Were There? And the reason why I'm going to take you through these charts is because, based upon the analysis that I did, I believe it proves that the original John Lennon was always in the timeline, and if that's the case, then he could not have died in 1966. So, chart number 1 is my hypothesis number 1 from the presentation, and it was my original hypothesis, where a new Lennon, the pinched nose version, emerged with Sgt. Pepper in 1967 and replaced the earlier Lennon as the primary character. However, the original Lennon continued along the timeline in a diminished role. In addition to the two Lennons, doubles and lookalikes were in play as well. So, this hypothesis says that image number 1 is the original John Lennon, and then image number 2 is the new version, which came out with Sgt. Pepper. And this version became the primary character playing the role of John Lennon. And the arrow is pointing to the very different noses. Okay, so that was my hypothesis number 1. And it was the hypothesis that I took into the presentation. Hypothesis number 2 and 3 evolved based upon doing the analysis of how many John Lennons were there. So let's move to the next slide, slide number 19. And let me move my picture-in-picture. So based upon my presentation, How Many John Lennons Were There?, I came up with hypothesis number 2, and that was a new hypothesis. And it stated that there were 2 primary Lennons during the 1962 through 1966 period. There was the version with the broader nose and the other with the narrower nose. So image number 1 and image number 2 is the version of Lennon with the broader nose. And even though some might struggle with saying that image number 1 looks different than image number 2, I took a very close look at the facial features, and I determined they are the same person. It's just that this is an early headshot. We could see that the eyebrows are the same, the ears are the same, especially the lobes. The nose is the same, the mouth, the smile. So I concluded that this is the same John Lennon. The version with the narrow nose had plastic surgery resulting in the pinched nose. This person took on the primary role of Lennon starting in 1967. So what I'm saying is image number 3 is possibly a different Lennon that was in the mix with the Lennons we see in image number 1 and image number 2. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the nose is starting to look very different. So this would be the second Lennon that was in the early period between 1962 and 1966, and he was paging in and out with images number 1 and 2. And then this version had plastic surgery. And the plastic surgery resulted in this look, in image number 4. However, the other Lennon, which would be the John Lennon up in images 1 and 2, continued to page in and out of the timeline in a diminished role. In addition to the two Lennons, doubles and lookalikes were in play as well. Okay, so again, even in hypothesis number 2, the original John Lennon was still in the timeline beyond 1966, which means that he didn't pass away in 1966. So let's now move to hypothesis number 3. So with hypothesis number 3, I said there was one primary John Lennon along the entire timeline. Around the 1964 through 65 period, Lennon had plastic surgery to narrow his nose. So that would mean he went from images 1 and 2, had the surgery, and it resulted in image number 3. Additional nose surgery was performed before the release of Sgt. Pepper, so that surgery would have taken place in late 1966, early 1967, resulting in the pinched look, and that would be image number 4. In addition, doubles and lookalikes were in play as well. So hypothesis number 3 says that John Lennon was always John Lennon, and that he had plastic surgery, specifically to his nose, which changed the look, because his nose went from being broader, as we see in image number 2, to getting narrower, as we see in image number 3, and then very narrow and pinched in image number 4. And again, if this is the case, then John Lennon's always been John Lennon, and he didn't die in 1966. Okay, so again, the reason why I'm going through these charts again is because the Titanic story, or that particular premise, says that all of the Beatles died in 1966. And based upon the work I did on looking at John Lennon, I don't think the original John Lennon went anywhere. He was always there. Maybe based upon the hypothesis he was in a reduced capacity, or like I said in hypothesis number 3, he just had plastic surgery and Lennon was always Lennon. So now what I want to do is take you to a chart, and this is fairly recent, I believe. Somebody sent me a link to this and I took a look, and it's John Lennon and his nipples. I kid you not. So let me move my picture-in-picture over here now. So I'm calling it Lennon and the bathing suit comparison. Now, the video that was sent to me focused on images number 1 and 2. So in image number 1, we see Lennon there with Cynthia. He's got a couple of pounds on him. We can see his chest and his nipples are here. And the video that went around then focused on the image from the Two Virgins album, which came out in 1968, where they're both nude on the front cover, and said, well, look where his chest and his nipple is now. It's up here. And it's down here in the picture to the left. Now, the first thing that I noticed is, as I mentioned, in image number 1, John has a couple of pounds on him. He's also not standing erect. He has a slouched stance. And because of the slouch, his chest appears lower. And also focus on his arm and the shape of his arm. So then if we move back to image number 2, we could see that Lennon has lost a lot of weight. He's standing erect. And because of that, his chest appears pushed up more. And if we also take a look at the size of the nipple, we can see that they are the same. and look at the arms. The shape of the arms is the same. So what I'm saying is Lennon in image number 1 is the same John Lennon in image number 2. It's just that in image number 2, he lost a lot of weight and he's standing erect versus having a few pounds on him, probably 10 to 15 pounds more than he has in image number 2, and the way he's standing. He's a little slouched, and so it appears that the chest has dropped. But then I found this image here, and this is prior to 1968, and he's in a bathing suit, and he's lost the weight, and we could see that this body, and where the chest is and where the nipples are, looks very much like image number 2. Okay? And then, if we move over to image number 4, this I'll call the double fantasy period, and I'm assuming that that's Sean Lennon. And we can see that he's very skinny here. He's lost a lot of weight. But the chest, the shape of the chest, the nipples look very much the same as what I see here in image number 3, as well as what I see in image number 2. So what I'm saying is, this is the same guy, I believe, in image number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if that's the case, that means that John Lennon, the original John Lennon, which is image number 1, made his way right through the timeline, which means that he didn't pass away in 1966. Okay, food for thought. Okay, so with that, let's move to slide number 22, and let's talk about some of the occult numbers with the album Two Virgins, because what presentation of mine wouldn't be complete without talking about the numbers and occultism and so on. So, Two Virgins was released in the U.S. on November 11th, 1968. So November 11th is 11/11, and 11, of course, is a master number in the occult. The album was released in the UK on November 29th, and of course 2 plus 9 is 11. So we have 11/11 again. Coincidence? I think not. The album was recorded on May 19th, 1968. So if we take the day and the month, 1 plus 9 plus 5, that equals 15, and 1 plus 5 equals 6. And then we take the year, 1968, we get 1 plus 9 plus 6 plus 8, which equals 24, and 2 plus 4 equals 6. So when we add the date and the month together with the year, we get the number 66, another occult number. And if we reduce 66 down further, we get 6 plus 6, which equals 12, and 1 plus 2 equals 3. So we know that 3, 6, 9 are very prominent in the occult, as well as within the Beatles. And of course, Billy has his McCartney 3 album out. Then I took a look at the runtime of the album. 29 minutes and 27 seconds. 2 plus 9 equals 11. 2 plus 7 equals 9. And we have 9/11. So for all of those folks that still believe the numbers don't mean anything, that it just happens, it's coincidence, I don't know what to tell you, because this is not coincidence. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to go back to the 2 images I mentioned earlier about the early picture of John in Hamburg and the image of John during double fantasy. And let's take a look at what we can see there. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I was going to come back to these 2 images. And the reason why is because it proves, number 1, that John Lennon did not die in 1966, and it also proves that John Lennon, the original John Lennon, made his way through the entire timeline, whether in a reduced capacity or whether John was always John. So this image on the left, just as a reminder, is from Hamburg, and he must be around 19 or 20 years old here. And then the image on the right is from the double fantasy period, so we'll call it 1980. So there is a 20-year difference between the images. And if we look at them, it is the same person. The ears, we see the earlobes, they're the same. The jawline, the chin, the facial structure is the same. Here's the mole. Here's the mole. The eyebrows are the same. It looks a little washed out in this image because of the lighting. The eyes are the same. Obviously, he's younger, but the shape of the eyes is the same. The nose and the mouth. This is the same person. And when I ran these images through ToolPy, which again I believe to be the better tool as far as facial comparisons goes, ToolPy came back and said that the face similarity ratio was 93%. And these two photos are of the same person. And again, what that means is that John Lennon, the original John Lennon, made his way through the timeline, and he did not pass away in 1966, which blows a big hole in that whole premise of them all dying back in August of 66 in that helicopter crash. And so what I did was I inserted another picture of Lennon from Hamburg, and we can see this is the same person in all three images. Now let's take a moment and look at a couple of slides to discuss the twin quote theory. And the twin theory, as I have seen it over time, is multi-flavored, which means it has a couple of twists to it. The first one is that Bio Paul had a twin brother who replaced him, and I concluded that this statement or this position is inconclusive. The other one I've heard is Billy is Paul's twin, and that's an absolute no. Billy is 5 years older. And the third is Billy himself has a twin that is not linked to Bio Paul. And my position is this is possible. But what's more likely is people are looking at doubles and lookalikes. And the issues that we're confronted with whenever we look at images is that many photos and images have been doctored or created as part of the PSYOP. And that the sources for many of the photos and images cannot be validated. As an example, here's an image that you will see if you look up this quote theory. And by the way, I have the link down below. It will also be in the description box if you want to read about it. Again, it's very entertaining. I don't buy into it, but it's a good read, so it's worth reading. And so we're told that this is Paul and Michael McCartney as infants, and I said allegedly, because we don't even know if they're the same age. When I look at this image, I see the child on the left looking a little older than the child on the right. And I'm going to get into this a little more with the next slide. So we really cannot trust a lot of the sources that are out there. A lot of times statements are just made and there is no confirmation or validation from these sources. They just put something out there. And unfortunately, a lot of people run with it. It goes back to the whole thing with speculation. So let's take a look at the twin images. And here's the image we just looked at. And as we know, Paul McCartney was born in June of 1942. And Mike McCartney was born in January of 1944. So that means there is an 18-month age difference between the two of them. And going back to what I said on the previous slide, this child here on the right does look younger to me than the child on the left. And if we move over to the next image, I don't know what to do with this because I can't tell anything. Neither one of these children look like the kids I'm seeing in image number 1. They could be, but it's very difficult to discern. Image number 3 is Jim McCartney, Paul McCartney's father, and we're told that here is Paul and here is Michael McCartney, and based upon this, quote, theory, that they are twins. I don't know if they're twins. How do we not know that the boy on the left, Paul McCartney, is not 18 months older than the boy on the right? We don't know. It's the same thing here in image number 4. This is Mary McCartney, biological Paul's mother. It's the same thing. I don't know if these two children are the same age. There could be an 18-month age difference. And the theory also states, at least in the link that is down below in the description box that I left for everybody, that the true twin of Paul McCartney, Michael McCartney, disappeared and he was swapped out with Mike McCartney, which would mean that Mike McCartney or Mike McGear is not biological Paul's biological brother. But the problem that I see is that this kid here looks exactly like this guy here. So we can see that they have the same eyes, the nose, even though the boy here is a youngster, looks very similar, and the mouth. Look at the shape of the mouth. Okay? So, I don't know. Mike McCartney or Mike McGear might not be the biological brother of Paul McCartney. They don't look anything alike. But then again, we all know families and siblings that are biologically related and they don't look similar. They don't look alike. And the whole backstory with regard to the Beatles has been fabricated. So we really can't do much with any of these images. All we can do is look at them. We really can't trust the sources because, as I stated in a slide earlier in the presentation, they've doctored and altered so many images from day one that it's amazing. It's unbelievable. So the whole thing has become a mishmash of just a ball of confusion. And it's very difficult to do these comparisons. That's why it takes so long to do them. And that's why it's so difficult to come to conclusions sometimes. Because it is a massive psyop. And the deep state, Tavistock, pulled out all the stops to ensure that nothing was going to get figured out. So with that, let me take you through what the twins really means to Paul McCartney and Billy. It's not this physical stuff, like physical twins. It's about twins in mythology. So this comes to us from Wikipedia. Here's the link down below. I will also put it down in the description box. So, twins in mythology. Twins appear in the mythologies of many cultures around the world. Twins in mythology are often cast as two halves of the same whole, sharing a bond deeper than that of ordinary siblings, or seen as fierce rivals. They can be seen as representations of a dualistic worldview. They can represent another aspect of the self, a doppelganger, or a shadow. And we're going to get to the shadow in a moment. Twins can also reflect a complete opposition of the other. For example, good and evil twin identities. Twins are often depicted with special powers. Twins in mythology often share deep bonds. Okay, so that is twins in mythology. Now, let's step through Billy. Billy and the Esoteric Twins. Biopol was born June 18th, 1942, and is a Gemini. Gemini represents twins. Billy's McCartney 2 album is referencing the twin symbolism. And then I have a note here. See the two shadows to the right. We have Billy in the center, and then we have a shadow to the left and a shadow to the right, denoted by ball number 1 and ball number 2. And remember, in the previous slide, it talked about shadows. Billy is a convergence of both himself and Biopol. He is between the, quote, twin pillars, the shadows, for example, Joachim and Boaz, the two pillars of Freemasonry. And Billy represents the path between the pillars, or he is representing enlightenment. And that's why he is in the center of the two shadows or the two pillars. McCartney 2 represents 9/11. The name McCartney has 9 letters. And then we have the Roman numeral 2, which can also be depicted as the number 11. Therefore, twins is not about physical twins, but an esoteric depiction of occult twin symbolism. And the next bullet comes to us from the Grand Masonic Lodge of Rhode Island. When the twin pillars find equilibrium, it is said to generate a third pillar, one in the middle, Billy, which esoterically represents man or mankind. It will also signify the union of Shushumna and the Kundalini, and Shushumna is the name given to the main energy channel of the subtle body. This sacred marriage will create and radiate throughout the human body, filling it with divine light. It is then that humanity will become the third column, or wisdom, enlightenment. So, when we talk about twins, as it applies to the Beatles and specifically to Paul McCartney and Billy, this is what it's about. Okay? I hope that helps. Okay, so here's the last topic. And you can see it's getting a little darker. It's taken me all day to do this because I've had to do things around the house and run errands and all that stuff. So I'm finally finishing up. And this is the topic and the premise that Paul McCartney never existed. Sometimes you'll see it in the context that the Beatles never existed. And the claim is that McCartney was a fictional character played by various actors and performers. He's not a real person. And as I mentioned, they will sometimes apply this claim to John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr as well. But we're going to focus on Paul McCartney. The analysis that I have seen on this particular premise, and it is limited, and if anybody has a link to some more in-depth research on this, please feel free to comment or to email me. But the analysis that I have seen to date typically consists of image comparisons, pointing out various doubles and lookalikes, especially as it pertains to the early period between 1962 and 1966, and then concluding there was no real Paul McCartney. And again, that is what I have seen so far. And if that's the only bit of analysis or the only type of analysis out there, then I think that that's problematic. Personally, I do believe biological Paul McCartney existed. So it's a bold claim, and bold claims require bold evidence. And what I've noticed about this hypothesis, and hypothesis is probably not the right term, it's probably more in the speculation bucket, is that it contains elements of my composite image explanation of Paul McCartney. And I've been talking about this now for a number of years. And what I've explained is that the controllers intentionally put out into the public domain different versions and looks of Paul McCartney over time in order to create a composite image, so that it makes it harder to make comparisons. In other words, people don't really remember what original Paul McCartney or biological Paul McCartney looked like, because they have this mishmash of composite imagery which has conditioned them to see and understand Paul McCartney within a certain context or lens. I hope that makes sense. And again, this was intentionally done. This premise also borrows, whether the proponents of this premise know it or not, it borrows from memoirs, because in the book it's explained that the controllers considered using multiple players/actors to play Paul McCartney post-mortem. And this was before Billy received the permanent contract to be the primary replacement. So in memoirs, it tells us that there were two options that were being weighed. Option A was have the Paul McCartney character played by multiple players and actors going forward. And the other option, option B, was to give the role to someone permanently so they could be the primary replacement, and that was Billy. So at the end of the day, the controllers decided on option B, with the use of doubles and lookalikes throughout the timeline, just to make everything very confusing if you're doing Paul is Dead or Beatles research. Now, my response to folks who comment and state that Paul McCartney never existed, and some people make the comment as if it's fact, and my response has been, it's an interesting premise, because it is, but it needs to be substantiated with evidence and deep research. Until then, it's an unsubstantiated claim. That's all it is, unless somebody can come forth with some very, very good research and dot connecting. Okay, so this was the last topic I wanted to cover. And with that, I'm going to wrap up the presentation. The comment section is open. Please feel free to comment. Let me know what you think. You guys have a great evening. We'll talk soon, and take care. Thanks for listening.